Why should I care about our presenter is Dr. Doreen Barrie, and the presentation comes at the appropriate time when Calgary and some other parts of Alberta are at stage 4 or 5 on water shortage. Stage 5 is a really drastic situation when they're going to cut down on water supply, water usage. Doreen will go into this in a presentation later. Doreen has given a presentation to us before on equalization payment. Doreen is an adjunct assistant professor in the political science department at the University of Calgary, teaching courses in Canadian politics, Alberta politics, political parties, federalism, and politics of water. A master's thesis compare American and Canadian political culture. The Ph.D. dissertation was a comparison of Canadian or Australian federalism. She has also co-authored and authored some textbooks and books. One is Canadian Politics Today, Democracy, Diversity, and Good Government. The book, The Other Alberta, Decoding a Political Enigma. The biography of former Premier Ralph Klein for the book Alberta Premiers of the 20th Century. There's a lot to go. I think we are ready to start. Before I pass it on to Doreen, with our invitation, we sent something like a spreadsheet on water audit. Please ignore that. That was not meant to be filled by anybody. It was, I got carried away and prepared a spreadsheet. But it's still useful to keep track of your water usage. I'll pass it on to Doreen.
Thank you. Actually, that's not. No, it's not working.
Right.
This week,
What?
Oh, well. I don't know if I'll need it.
Oh, it's President Eccles, you need to mute. Yeah.
You don't.
Or if you don't need it.
and finite substance that has no substitute. I call it the Cinderella of physics because it does all of the heavy lifting while the ugly sisters get to go to the ball. Now, Canadians are water gluttons, second only to the Americans. We use about 355 liters a day per capita. In the US, it's over 500. The latest figure I saw was 575. In Europe, they use much less than that, half of that. Now, the amount Canadians pay for it is less than the cost of delivering it. And the OECD remarked, they describe Canada's water as cheaper than dirt. So, to say we take it for granted.
Sorry, Doreen, cannot hear you at all.
Oh. I don't know.
Thank you. Because I'm trying to
Okay, maybe you should mute yourself.
I had muted myself.
Okay, so
Turned all.
see if they should be able to hear now. Send a message. Can you send a message?
They say it's as if it's in the distance.
Okay, can we try using the microphone again? So
Try talking into the speaker now and we'll see. Prakash, can you hear? Please now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but I cannot see your picture.
You can't have everything, Prakash.
No picture.
And the audio is erratic. I don't know why, but you seem to lose.
Okay, we've got a lot of engineers working on the problem, so we should fix it very soon.
So maybe if I put this closer.
$290 purchase.
Okay, so if the microphone is closer, I should be able to hear now.
Right.
Okay,
So I will need this.
no, you shouldn't need this. So it should be
Okay.
clear.
Okay, so, okay, good. Okay, where's my mouse? Before I move this on, I want to ask you how much, whether any of you know how much fresh water we have on this planet. If you know the answer, please don't tell me, but if you have to guess, please guess how much of the water we have on this planet is fresh water as opposed to salt water.
10%?
10%?
2%.
2%?
3%.
3%?
More.
Well, someone give me 5. It's actually 2.5%. So. Okay. So, first of all, to set the stage, I want to talk to you about water quality and water quantity. And I have to confess, this is very depressing. And so we have a jar of Prozac on the way out. You can help yourself. The first section will talk about water quality and quantity on a global basis. And the next section will deal with how water is allocated, which will help you to understand the situation that we are dealing with here in Alberta. One method is a water market, which is what we have in Alberta, well, parts of Alberta. So First of all, the amount of water on the planet is finite, and only an ice comet would deliver more water to us. Water is used in enhanced oil recovery, fracking. Admittedly, it's often brackish water, but when it's used in this way, it's lost to the environment for thousands of years. Now, water covers 70% of the Earth's surface, and we call it the blue planet because it looks so beautiful from space. But 97.5% of the water is salty, and only 2.5 is fresh. And of that 2.5%, 2% is frozen at the poles and in glaciers elsewhere. And these used to contain, because they're melting now and there's less, about 70% of the world's fresh water. And they're melting rapidly. There's a glacier called the Thwaites Glacier in the Antarctica. It's also called the Doomsday Glacier, because when it melts completely, we hope it doesn't happen, but there are predictions it might be in the but 2100 we wouldn't have that glacier. And when it melts, the sea levels will rise 2 feet. So only 0.3% of the water is surface water in lakes and streams and rivers. Now, this is the source of a lot of water that we use. It's these surface waters support a lot of species, but 35% of all freshwater fish species are extinct, endangered, or threatened. There's a lot of toxic runoff going into the rivers. Most of the Earth's water is groundwater. 1.5 billion people, about a third of the world's population, depend on groundwater for drinking. Now, groundwater is not being replenished. We take it out by the bucketful and replace it by the cupful. There's so the amount of groundwater is 0.61%. The Ogallala Aquifer is the biggest aquifer in the world. It extends almost 500,000 square miles from the Dakotas to the Texas Panhandle. So 8 states depend upon it, and it's being depleted 14 times faster than nature can replenish it. The water in it has been accumulating for thousands of years. The level is now down, and it costs some farmers about $1 million a year just to pump it up to the surface. So what we need really is retentive land, so landscapes that are unpaved, because this will help replenish groundwater. So if it's falling in forests and natural areas, it seeps into the ground and replenishes the groundwater. But if it's on concrete or tarmac, it just flows into the rivers and causes floods. Now, consumption has increased 600% over the last 100 years. Now, this is partly through population increase, but also partly through rising living standards. Now, in Canada, we have a lot of water, but 60% of our water drains north, whereas most of the population lives in the south. There have been calls for interbasin transfers, but when you transfer water from one basin to another, you transfer aquatic life and you might bring in invasive species. So apparently Alberta is not, according to the Water Act, we cannot do interbasin transfers, but now people are starting to talk about it again. Now I want to turn to quality. There are numerous sources of water pollution. So farmers use fertilizers and pesticides. There's animal waste from livestock operations. And when it rains, that washes into the rivers. I had a student who lived on a farm near Lethbridge, which was close to one of these intensive livestock operations. And I asked him how many animals they had on that, in that operation. And it was hundreds of thousands. They whatever they do in these operations, there's such a concentration of waste when these things are there, so it is a real problem. The other problem is fertilizer use, which cause algal blooms, and these suffocate the water and deprive it of oxygen. Now in Nebraska, there was so much fertilizer overuse that nitrates got into the groundwater and caused blue baby syndrome. Now, blue baby syndrome means that the babies turn blue because they're using this water to mix the formula, and these children have this syndrome. Industry also produces various toxic substances, and they all end up in the water. There's another problem which I think people don't realize. When we take medications, we don't absorb all of it. And some of it, most of it is excreted and ends up in the water. Now, some people even flush medications down the toilet, right? I'm sure you do, but some people do. Now, the birth control pill alone has had discernible effects, resulting in the feminization of fish. So male fish have eggs. There's also Prozac and numerous other medications that are found in the water. Now in Calgary, we're lucky because we don't have, if we had New York upstream of us, we'd have a real water problem. But fortunately, we don't. Now, water treatment doesn't remove these residues from the water. It's only Victoria that now, which has got a brand new water treatment facility. They used to pump it into the ocean. And they've got a new facility, and it takes out drug residues. I don't know if it's all of them or some parts, but anyway. Then, of course, there's sewage and wastewater, which are major sources of pollution globally. About 80% of the world's wastewater is dumped untreated into the environment, and it ends up in the waterways. Then there are plastics, which are clogging oceans and killing fish. In addition to that, there are microfibers, and these microfibers are in our clothing. Every piece of clothing that you own has probably got microfibers in it, because if it's not wool or cotton or silk, it's got some sort of plasticky things like polyester in it. And when these garments are washed, they get, the microfibers get into the water, and they get into this, and they cannot remove them. It's extremely expensive to remove them. So they cannot be filtered out when they're treated. Now, when these microfibers are consumed by fish, the fish get sick. And then, of course, if we eat that fish, we don't know what the impact on humans is. The evidence is not conclusive. Microfibers have been found in the Arctic Ocean, And there are microplastics in breast milk, in our brains, and in our blood. And there's microfibers in bottled water. So I have to consume some. So we've polluted the water, but in addition, we've diverted water and dammed water as well. Our engineering feats are legendary, and we've benefited from them. So for example, there's an aqueduct from the Colorado River that delivers water to Southern California, and this is where it flows uphill towards Money. The water is pumped over the tops of mountains to be delivered to Los Angeles. Now, California is arid and semi-arid, so storage of water is important, and they've got over 1,500 dams just in California. The region has been dubbed the Cadillac Desert. Now, thousands of dams have been built, and they've been built for hydroelectric power, they've been built for irrigation, and also for flood control. Now, when the enormous Three Gorges Dam, have you people heard of the Three Gorges Dam? Yes. When it was filled up, not only did it tilt the world on its axis by 2 centimeters at both poles, it also slowed the rotation of the Earth. Now, I mean, that's the kind of engineering I don't think we need. So within the last 50 years or so, we've polluted and depleted water on the planet more than any other generation has. That is a pretty sobering thought. I now want to turn to allocation. Mouse.
At the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
if the mouse wouldn't be. Okay, so how is water allocated? You know, how do we make decisions about who gets what and when? There are 2 main types of systems. These are riparian rights and prior allocation. In the US, it's called prior appropriation, but we're more polite over here. And there are some hybrids between the 2. In addition, you can allocate water through a market. And so that's what we have in Alberta, in some parts of Alberta. Now, riparian rights, we inherited it from Britain. And riparian rights as a system are appropriate where precipitation is plentiful. And there's no irrigation necessary. So riparian owners, that is people whose property abuts a river or a lake, they can swim in the water, they can fish in it, they can build a dock, they can sail on it. They also have reasonable use of the water, but they cannot affect the quality or the quantity for other users. Now, riparian rights cannot be sold, and pure riparian rights have, in most cases, been replaced by legislation. Even in water-rich areas, however, licenses are now required for some things. For example, in Ontario, you have to get a permit to withdraw water if you have a bottling plant, for example. Now, the prior appropriation system emerged in the American West, the US and Canada too, is roughly bisected by the 100th meridian. It's a longitudinal line. So in the eastern half, the continent is moist, and in the west, it is arid or semi-arid. So this line goes through western Manitoba and in the US through Kansas, so to give you a vague idea. The prior appropriation system is a legacy of the gold rush in California. This predated government, so the law of the jungle or vigilante justice prevailed. It was really the Wild West. So the system was based on the most elementary notion of justice, first in time, first in right. So if you were a miner and you staked a claim, you got first dibs on the water, and everybody else who came after you. I mean, you could exhaust the whole supply if you wanted. So first in time, first in right is what underpins prior appropriation. Whoever had the first claim, as I mentioned, got the water. So when government and law and order finally arrived, these same practices were well established and embedded. And so the system of prior appropriation was officially adopted in the US. So the prior in Canada, riparian rights were appropriate in other parts of the country, but not on the dry prairies. So the Canadian government altered the common law doctrine and passed the Northwest Irrigation Act in 1894. And that's what ushered in the prior allocation system that we use on the prairies. Farmers were issued licenses to withdraw a certain volume of water, and the senior licenses have priority over those who came later. So when there is a time of scarcity, they were assured of getting the entire entitlement, while the junior licensees might get nothing. So it was first in time, first in right. Now, in Alberta, licenses were initially granted in perpetuity, but more recently they have a term and they expire after a certain term, but the renewal is almost automatic. So in theory, the senior licenses have access to their entire entitlement before anybody else gets a drop. But this really hasn't been put to the test, because when we have had droughts in the past, they have made informal arrangements to share the water. This is missing. Oh. This is the Murray Darling. I'll talk about it later, maybe. I'm just putting that up and I'll talk about it. So in the Murray-Darling, it's a very sophisticated basin, and this is how they allocate water. There's high security, that those are the senior most licenses, and general security is not so reliable. And the way they allocate it is They decide how much they estimate how much there is in the consumptive pool for that year. And then they allocate the water to all the people who have licenses. And then the rest is for the environment. Now, strangely enough, very often there isn't anything left. So the government of Australia purchases what we consider a crown resource, purchases licenses from license holders so they could have it for in-stream use. And that is, we can talk about Australia later on because things are not going very well, even though the Murray-Darling Basin is considered the gold standard. So irrigation. So unlike the US, in Canada, things, what am I going to fact? Okay. The process of allocating water was much more peaceful and civilized. But there's an interesting sidebar to irrigation in Alberta. It started with the Mormons. There were some Mormons who moved up to Alberta in the 1890s, I guess, or perhaps a little earlier, and they started irrigating. And the CPR, which had a lot of land around there and wanted people to come and settle on that land, realized that they would have difficulty with water. And so they approached the Mormons, and the Mormons advised them on irrigation, and that's how irrigation got going here. So the bulk of irrigation in Alberta is done by 13 irrigation districts. And these districts account for 85% of Alberta's irrigated land. All of them are in the South Saskatchewan River Basin, of which Calgary is a part. There are almost 3,000 private irrigation licenses, but the quantities they get, I understand, are not very large. So each irrigation district has a board, and a peak organization of irrigation districts is the province-wide irrigation council. And this council makes recommendations to the minister, and they monitor the operations and financial performance of the districts, and they hear appeals when there are rulings in any of the 13 irrigation districts. Now, irrigation is the largest user of water in the province by a wide margin. It utilizes approximately 71% of the total. And Alberta accounts for about 70% of irrigation in the country. And even though we only have 2.2% of Alberta's fresh water, we use a disproportionate amount of fresh water in Alberta. Now, irrigation districts pay no fees for the withdrawal of water. They don't pay for the water. They do charge their members for the construction and maintenance of irrigation infrastructure. And irrigation infrastructure initially was subsidized, built by governments, federal government and provincial governments. But now they're managed, the irrigation districts themselves do some of the construction of these things. Now, since the first license was issued, and that was in 1894, there have been 20,000 others that have been issued to date. And most of the water allocated, that about 74%, is tied up in 20 licenses. So there are some water wealthy irrigation districts and licensees. The Eastern Irrigation District diverts between 50 and 90% of the Bow. The Bow and Old Man rivers account for 67% of water use in Alberta. So you could see how concentrated this is in this part of the river basin and why we are running out of water. The Athabasca accounts for 8%, a lot of that in the oil sands. But you can see that most of the water consumed in our area is, and that's why there are threats to water supplies because of the drought we're having at the moment. Now, irrigation is a consumptive use. A consumptive use means that the water is consumed and it doesn't return to the river. You know, if you have hydroelectric power and you're using lots of water, but it remains in the system. Now, these irrigation districts are a powerful group. They reflect the political power of rural areas. And evidence of their power and influence is the fact that first in time, first in right, FITFER, the prior allocation system remains intact. They have also been permitted to sell water. They have been permitted to sell water for, quotes, other uses. So from golf courses to processing plants, like McCain's has got a huge processing plant. They spent 600 million expanding it. It's a French fry processing plant, and I believe we produce more potatoes than they do in PEI. Now, the irrigated agriculture contributes $5 billion to the economy. So, you know, we're growing things in that region because the weather is appropriate for what they want to grow, and they couldn't grow anywhere else in Alberta because it doesn't get as hot as it gets there. But I mean, just going back to what I was saying about the irrigation districts being allowed to sell their water. I mean, they get a tree, they sell it, and I don't know if you remember when Cross Iron Mills was being built, they couldn't get water. Calgary said, we're not going to give you water. So they're selling their surplus water. And if you look at that graph there, the yellow line on the top is what their licenses are for. That's the total. The blue line is the water diverted by all districts, and the area actually irrigated. So they don't use all of the water that and in a way that's good because it means that they leave it in the river. It's not used intensively. But now if they're not using the water themselves and the surplus is being sold, the water is being used more intensively. It means there's less that's going to be in the streams, and these groups are benefiting from a resource that they get free. And for the Cross Iron Mills, the Eastern Irrigation District, I think, sold them that water for $15 million. Now, the federal government has contributed $1.5 billion to fund irrigation projects, not just in Alberta, but in other parts of the country. And the Alberta government is planning to expand irrigation in the province by 20%. So that means they're going to have to store water in reservoirs and I think that's going to be quite controversial. The other problem is prolonged irrigation causes problems of waterlogging and salinity. And we've been irrigating for a long time. So I think that we are looking at problems. I think we probably already have problems, but I haven't heard about them. Has anybody heard about problems with irrigation in the province? No, I mean, if we are having problems, it's a secret. So scarcity in Alberta has led to the adoption of a water market. Yes, the industry in that area contributes a lot of money to Alberta's GDP. So if you look at the fact that 6% of cultivated land contributes 19% of agriculture, you could see why that is so attractive. And yes, and they have these large irrigation. So we have scarcity in Alberta, and this has led to the adoption of a water market as a device to ensure that water is available in Alberta, in southern Alberta. So why do markets emerge and how do they work? How do they evolve? Well, for a market to come into existence, you have to have scarcity, right? And the other thing that you have to have is severing the link between the land and the water license. So you could sell your land, no, you could sell your water license and keep your land. And in other words, if you're a struggling farmer and you have access to water because you've been farming for a long time, you can get quite wealthy by selling your water license. Now, the water in the South Saskatchewan River Basin was over allocated. And due to a drought, there was no water to allocate to new users. So in 2005, there was a moratorium on new licenses. So if somebody needed water, they had to buy it from somebody else, buy the license from somebody else. So this is how the market was born, and it was sort of accidental. So now that we have a market, it permits license holders to transfer part of their license or their entire license to somebody else. And they could do it permanently or temporarily. And when a permanent transfer takes place, the government may hold back 10% of that license for the environment, for in-stream purposes. They may, but they don't often do it. Now, some critics believe that the South Saskatchewan River Basin is limited. Oh, I meant to do this about the expansion. Sorry, this is what I just mentioned. It's when they were expanding. So it's the basin is limited in its ability to function efficiently, this market that has been established, because there is an incomplete specification of the rights of people. There are also a large number of senior license holders, and these powerful few are not interested in a market. There's also a lack of standardized criteria for evaluating trades, and there's the inability to make annual or seasonal transfers. So there's not that flexibility. The other criticism is that First Nations are treated like all Albertans. I mean, when we think about first in time, who was first in time? So from an ecosystem perspective, excuse me, then it's more bottled water. So from an ecosystem perspective, the greatest challenge is that the government lacks the will to set meaningful in-stream flow objectives and or to claw back or buy licenses. They don't have the political will. Now, Bob Sanford, he lives in Canmore. He worked for the UN University Institute for Water, and he co-authored the UN Water in the World We Want report. It came out about 6 years ago. Now, he argues that the real problem is that we lack a set of principles in the Alberta water market. So these principles are laws and policies and guidelines, in essence, an ethical framework for the market. And he argues that this stops us from chipping away. There's nothing to stop us from chipping away at natural systems until there is nothing left of their life-sustaining functions. So the elements that the market fails to value are these kinds of principles. We've developed water markets accidentally or not so accidentally, and that's not how public policy should be developed. So there are a lot of flaws in the way our market works. It hasn't taken off like a rocket, as the government, I think, thought it would. And it's mainly because these big license holders don't want to do. If you can sell access to other industries, why would you? So we have to keep in mind that water markets are unique. They have unique characteristics, given how essential water is, because everybody needs it. It's not just an economic instrument. It's embedded in a particular social, political, ethical context. And that as a result of that, they're not efficient because there are these social needs that transcend the market. And there are some people who argue that for a market to operate, the state has to play such a major role that on how it operates and ensuring the public interest. Yes, okay. I believe the food is coming. You could smell it and everyone's distracted now. Yes, so for a market to operate properly, the state has to play a major role. They have to monitor what's going on. They have to make sure the public interest is being recognized. And it's such a large job that it's hardly worth the effort. So the government should not actually engage in this market. Now, managing water is a huge challenge. And the way it's done reveals how it is regarded. Is it a right or a need or a commodity, or is it a common resource? So this is at the root of debates about privatization of water. They privatized water in Britain, and it's a nightmare. The issues and the problems relating to water are complex, and the solutions are very expensive. Water is regarded as a wicked problem. That is a problem that has many interdependent factors, and it seems impossible to solve. In Canada, all three levels of government have a role to play, and jurisdiction is shared. And there's a fragmentation of authority, not only between governments, but within governments. We have a federal system that, and as a result of that, we don't have a national water policy or national water standards. And this is because of our highly decentralized federal system. Now, I wanted to end on a happier note, giving you an example from right here in Calgary. In 1981, the city of Calgary was renewing its license and for water supply, and it increased the volume considerably because people were flocking to Calgary at that time, and they anticipated that it would need a whole lot more water. So they projected growth for 25 years based on the influx of people. So, but at the same time, in addition to getting a big increase in water supply, they decided to fix the leaky pipes. And at that time, there was no water metering, and then they brought in water metering. So when the pipes were fixed and there more water meters were installed, consumption dropped by guess what percentage? It's a staggering amount. 75%. So now Calgary is water rich, and we're selling water to other people. So there is hope. And you know, the thing is that the water supply systems and infrastructure in so many parts of the world are very, very old. Here in Calgary, they're not that old, but in some cities, you know, even in Eastern Canada, it's extremely expensive to fix them. Okay, so now I know you guys want to eat, so I don't know what you want to do about questions and answers, Patchy.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Very good presentation. Learned quite a lot. I'll be open for a short time with the questions. Anybody?
I have one question.
Okay.
Doreen, thank you very much. It was very, very illuminating the way the water is being treated in the past, mainly through federal agencies and also information. Regarding Calgary, I have a little story to share with you.
Is it a happy story?
How the water is being wasted.
It's not a question here, a comment.
It's a comment, but I'd like your insight into this. In Signal Hill, we have a problem with the water from the city that is on the east side of the hill is beginning to slide because of the water seepage in the ground. And there are very expensive homes further up the hill. And the people living down the hill, they are worried in case this whole mass begins to slide. So our community, we contacted the city and asked them to do something about it. First, they said, no, it's not our problem. It is not city water. This is natural spring water. So we said, okay, let's do some tests. So the city spent 1 year doing the tests, and finally, they decided that yes, this was city water because chlorine was present. Now, then they started, okay, let's find out where is the leakage. And now, a year and a half later, the leakage is all over the place and mainly in the hydrants. So, the point I'm trying to make here is that when we had the city people give a presentation, I asked the question. I said, guys, do you ever do a volumetric balance on the city water? Because you have meters installed everywhere. What does it tell you with respect to the cumulative water consumption from the meters to what you see that you are supplying into the system? Oh no, we don't do anything like that. So how do you know how much is leaking on a volumetric basis? They don't do it.
No, I guess they say they don't have enough money for that.
I don't think it's a question of money, it's a question of having the will to do it.
Yes, but it is very expensive. And it is, I think, quite time consuming to try and find out the source of it.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I feel for you.
Okay, try and keep your question relevant to what
Yes, I have
I
a
said.
quick question on, it was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. But I just wondered what country or countries you would consider are a good standard of water management in the context of life as it is today. Are there any?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You see, for example, they have water markets in parts of the US. They have a water market in Australia. But the other systems of, allocation systems, if you have to have irrigation, then, it's a whole different ball game, right? And so that's what we are. But in terms of which country has the best, I don't know. I know more about the worst. Yeah, Britain has privatized its water supply. It's just a nightmare.
But just one other factor is that the climate change is affecting the aridity or whatever you want to call it. In
Yes.
many parts of the world.
Yes.
So that's a factor that's really playing into this.
Yeah. But the thing is, you see, I mean, I think if people are more mindful of their consumption, it would make a huge difference. And I mean, people are just oblivious. They don't know. And I'd like to believe that once they know about things, they will think about their consumption. And that might improve
Well,
things.
let's talk about them for sure.
Okay,
Lots in the news right now about our short-term problems, lack of snowfall and other things.
Yeah.
So what is it that you think we could expect over the next month? We know there are quotas on irrigation for farmers in Alberta. What do you think you can expect?
Well, I think you can expect not to be able to water your lawn. I think that you can expect appeals for consumption to go down. I mean, I wish the city would use that water audit form, but they're coming up with something big next year, probably an app, something. But I do believe, like Calgarians and Albertans generally responded very positively when we had electricity shortages. Remember power outages? And so similarly, I think that people will respond well if they are asked to do that. They talk about bringing in a market because that's one way people will conserve water because they know that it's so precious. And then they say that the market will, the water would flow to the most valued sort of activities. Well, I mean, growing almonds is very lucrative. It's a high value product. But I mean, is it better to grow almonds than to grow wheat, say? So I think that is a specious argument about using a market to make the decision. Yeah.
Doreen, my understanding is that when the original NAFTA was written, the United States government had dibs, if they needed it, on Canada's water supply. One of your slides showed that the direction of water flow was primarily north rather than south. So how do you still put that in the new reform NAFTA? The requirement to in the case of America's needs, to export large quantities of water.
No, we're not supposed to. No exports of water are banned except, bottled water, which is a considerable amount of water. So that's what we done, but we're not. I mean, there were some madcap schemes in the past to get Alaska water down to the United States. Just make big canal through Canada, through the Okanagan. And all kinds of, I think, schemes to get water from Quebec into the southwestern US. But I mean, those are all ridiculous.
Your third slide was interesting. it pointed out the effect or impact of the Ogallala aquifer.
Yeah.
The Keystone XL pipeline was stymied largely because it was crossing that aquifer.
Yeah,
With
I know.
the potential to do irreparable, some would say, harm to the water supply
Mhm.
being extinguished.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Is water regulated on federal basis or on a provincial basis?
On a provincial basis.
Provincial basis.
Yeah, and there are some regulations that are city.
You.
We've got one online from Leo Clayman. So Leo, I don't know if you can unmute and ask. Yep. Try asking now, please.
Yes. With the production of hydrogen, has there been any estimates made as to how much water that will take?
I don't know if there have been, but I haven't heard about that. And I mean, I don't know that we'll get accurate figures, you know, because depending on how badly they want to produce hydrogen, they might not want everyone to know how much water it takes. There's a lot of water that you need and power that you need, you know, for various things like cryptocurrencies and algorithms, AI and cooling, you know. So, I mean, there are a lot of calls for water, and I don't know whether we can keep up.
Doreen Prakash Malik here. I heard lately that government of Alberta is planning on water allocation. Could you enlighten us on that, what it means and how it will be implemented?
I don't know. I didn't catch what you said, Prakash. The government of Alberta is considering
Water allocation, because of the potential for drought, it has been lack of snow, lack of rain, and they're concerned that for farmers, there won't be enough water, so water allocation is being considered. So,
well, what they're doing is, you know, because all these licenses have entitlements to water, they have got them all together and they have signed a memorandum of understanding. So I read a legal analysis of that just last week, and they said that this is a voluntary agreement. Nobody is obliged to do anything, and they're dubious whether it will actually work because, you know, people might just walk away from it. This is informal. So I think we might have dodged the bullet because we've been getting a lot of precipitation recently. But, you know, I think that we will have problems down the road, and it'll really test our allocation system.
yeah, just one more comment I would like to make. In Edmonton, there was some problem with the water treatment plant. So they were telling, don't keep the tap running when you're brushing your teeth. I found that amusing. Why would anybody be running the tap when you're brushing your teeth?
You'll be surprised what people do, Prakash.
That you.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll just wrap up now.
Doreen, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Presentation. Thank you very much for coming to this new venue. I hope you all enjoy, and thank Abhishek and his staff for the food we are going to eat. During we contribute something to the Operation Eyesight on your behalf.
Oh, thank you.
And there's a certificate for you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.